Welcome to the first episode of 2022, episode 314 of Hot Media with Bob Mann. And as those of you on the audio version of the podcast just heard, we talk about the most important and controversial issues in mass media, as well as some of the hottest content. And you see on the other side of the screen right now, one of our long-term guests, one of our favorite guests, who is Rem Rider. Whenever we have a show about journalism and the news media in particular, which is at least 50% of our show's content, we talk to Rem. Rem is currently an adjunct professor at Widener University in Pennsylvania, but during his long and very successful career, he has been editor-at-large and media columnist for USA Today, and also editor and senior vice president of the American Journalism Review. And today, Rem, we cannot step away from the coverage of January 6th. Sometimes in my head, I want to say 9/11 because in some ways to me it's very similar in terms of what it meant to the country. But I had a tough time yesterday because while I really thought President Biden gave a great speech, some of the aftermath of it upset me. I looked around various channels, not the channels that are in my own echo chamber, but some of the other ones, and hearing some of the apologies and defenses being put up again for Donald Trump and the rioters. So first of all, Happy New Year. Welcome back to the show, and give us a little rundown on what you thought of the media coverage of the anniversary.
Well, I think you just made a really important point. Particularly, you mentioned 9/11 and January 6th. And yes, both, I mean, just a huge and traumatic episodes for the United States. The difference, though, is in the reaction of the people, where 9/11 really was pretty much a uniform reaction, of a nation attacked and people banding together, and there was like a shared purpose. Uh, and now we have the opposite, which kind of reflects where we are politically. Um, I mean, there are a lot of things you can argue about in political life. You can either like the Affordable Care Act or not like it, or like Build Back Better or not like it. Policy differences, but there's really not a lot to argue about January 6th. This was a terrible attack on the United States government, an attempt to block Congress from doing its job and kind of anointing the new president. And yet you wouldn't know it from the reaction. I mean, there were an awful lot of people who were appalled by it and watching our police officers beaten by this mob, the people chanting they wanted to hang Mike Pence and looking for hunting down Nancy Pelosi. And yet we've got this denialism that was reflected in the coverage, as you mentioned. There's really an effort to rewrite history, to deny history, and say this was no big deal, when it was clearly a huge deal. I mean, 5 people died, and the day, of course, could have been much worse if it weren't for some of the heroism, some of the police officers, and frankly some luck. And so this denialism is almost as scary as the actual event, because in a democracy, you're not going to don't have to agree on everything, but you have to be arguing about shared facts. And in this case, we have a lot of people denying facts, and that makes it very hard to go forward. And so seeing a Lindsey Graham attack, this to me was almost funny when he attacked President Biden, probably the most important and certainly the best speech of his presidency so far. Graham attacked him for politicizing January 6th. Well, if there's a more innately political event than January 6th, I don't know what it is. But I think it reflects what you're saying and what you heard in some of, as you say, the echo chamber of the Republican denialists trying to minimize what happened on January 6th.
What what has upset me the most, Rem, is this constant chorus of let's move on, let's move forward, as if you can deny this history, as if this is not going to be history repeating itself in 2025. You know that Trump is just dying to do this yet again. And this idea of, come on, let's put it behind us. is absolutely amazing from people who, in many cases, have been responsible people in the past. But now it's as if, oh, let's make it as if it didn't happen. And if you want to talk about it, you're stuck in the past.
Right. It's really appalling. I thought Biden had a pretty good line about this when he said, you can't heal a wound until you've figured out the extent of it, and that's what we're dealing with now. It's why things like the effort of the January 6th Select Committee in Congress and of the investigation by Attorney General Merrick Garland are so important. I think it's important for this country to get a handle on what happened because, as you say, it's not over yet. This was not just a one off. The event stemmed from a lot of political developments and a lot of people refusing to believe the election results and a lot of people organizing to do something about it. So to me, it's the height of irresponsibility, as you suggest. Say, oh well, let's get past it. We're forward looking. Well, you can't really look forward until you figured out what's gone wrong.
And a lot of the people who are saying, let's put it behind us, well, they're also saying a lot of things about law and order. And, well, why not just open the jails? Hey, let's forget about it. Let's move on. Let's not punish anyone. I mean, it's mind boggling and so inconsistent. But here's one of the things that worries me. And I am not a person who says, the media just wants to make everything dour. But I got really depressed yesterday reading the New York Times. So many stories about the possibility of a civil war. A professor in San Diego who has a book about how civil wars start in other countries, and that very often people who were interviewed said, well, I just didn't see it coming. I had no idea. But at the same time, I also read someone, I forget who it was, but said that if you talk too much about the possibility of a civil war in the country, you may have a self fulfilling prophecy. What is your feeling about opinion pieces, analytical pieces about a potential civil war in the United States when the potential really exists, but that argument is out there that it could become a self fulfilling prophecy?
Yeah, I mean that's a tricky one, as you say. I mean, we've just been talking about the dangers of minimizing what happened and not coming to terms with what happened and moving on without knowing exactly what happened. At the same time, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy if you overdo it. If there are too many uh, calls or pieces saying this is going to happen. So it is a time when sometimes restraint is important. You need to be very careful with this because I think we are, not to be all alarmist. And as you say, reading the news, watching the news, scrolling the news can be a very depressing prospect these days because there is a lot to be concerned about. The combination of the political instability and a pandemic that won't go away, the economic challenges. This is really a really fraught time for the country. And so I think you raise a good point. You want to be careful not to get carried away and go further, to say more than we really know.
It's impossible in this day and age, especially to predict the future. But as we look ahead to 2022 and some of the biggest challenges, this is one of the things that I had promoted in my tweet about this upcoming episode of the podcast. Not just the anniversary, but also looking ahead, moving forward, but in a different way. Some of the biggest challenges. Who'd ever think that COVID would still be a challenge in 2022 for the news media? But it's tough because there is the exhaustion factor of COVID. We're tired of it. There is a constant mix of information, including from credible sources as well as from bizarre sources on the internet. Changes in opinion among medical professionals and scientists. Talk a little bit about the COVID challenge that is not the same as the COVID challenge to reporters of 2020 and 2021. This is a different stripe of the same animal.
It really is, and it's in fact almost more complex than it was then. First, as you say, we're now going into our third year of trying to deal with COVID, and I don't know about you, when this began, I never foresaw anything close to this, or the idea that 2 years later we'd be where we are with record levels. And it really is tough for just as we were talking about covering the political situation, the journalists are really in a bind because you certainly don't want to undersell it because it really is obviously a huge public health threat. And so much of how it goes depends on how people respond to it. And if people don't take it seriously enough, that's contributing to the problem. At the same time, you don't want to contribute to panic. And there was some thought when this new variant surfaced not that long ago that the media was overreacting to it before it knew too much. Uh, as it turns out, there was plenty to react to, but it's really that's a very important balance is to do as much as you can and talk to enough knowledgeable people to just so that you're not under or overselling it. But you're not going to expect the media to do it perfectly is crazy because nobody's doing it perfectly, which gets to your other point that sometimes the information we're getting from health officials seems muddled. And the CDC, which used to be kind of, to me anyway, like the font of brilliance when it came to health issues, was terribly politicized under President Trump, and in the Biden administration has not been very sure-footed or reassuring. And then there's the other important question you mentioned for the science that things change a lot. So people will criticize Fauci, so that 6 months ago he said X. Well, sometimes the change is because our understanding changes. The COVID, it's the novel coronavirus because it's new. So we don't know a whole lot about it, and we keep learning about it. So throw all that together, and it's an enormous challenge for the media. Plus, you throw in the instinct, in some places of journalism, to go for the flashy and the exciting. And so, if there's any time, kind of resist that to be as sober as you can while not minimizing the risk. That's a lot to ask.
Let's talk not so much about an upcoming 2022 challenge as something that's happened. I didn't even know about this till you told me about it in our pre-interview prep here as we were trying to take audio levels, etc. And that is one of my favorite apps, The Athletic. I teach a course at Caldwell University coming up this semester called Sports Media, and I make sure I have The Athletic. It's about a $60 a month subscription because it has so much good sports news, not just scores and schedules. And they just got a big buyout from one of the biggest names in media. So tell the audience a little bit more about what you just told me.
Just this week, the New York Times acquired the Athletic, which is really interesting. As you say, Bob, I think the Athletic is terrific, and they had a very aggressive strategy. They spent a lot of money, and they went out and hired often some of the best sports writers in local sports markets, spending a lot of money to do it to woo them away from newspapers. Actually, one of the founders even promised some of these trying to walk back but he said the Athletic was going to bleed these newspapers, and in fact, it has. There's a lot of really literate and interesting sports coverage there, and the acquisition makes sense for the Times because the Times is kind of has revolutionized its business model. As we've talked about before, newspapers for many years were supported by advertising, and many of them did really well because they had advertising monopolies in local markets, and there was a quite profitable industry. The internet came along and changed all that. Craigslist blew up the classified ad business. Uh, Readers gravitated to the digital world, and digitally, traditional newspaper companies have not been able to get a lot of digital ads. It's all dominated by Google and Facebook. So the Times had this great bet they took a while back where they said, we're going to charge uh, for digital subscriptions. And you'll remember that was revolutionary at the time. But the wisdom was information wants to be free. You can't charge in the internet. Well, the Times went ahead and did it, uh, often starting with the what they call a leaky paywall, where you could get a number of articles free, and then you'd have to start paying for it. And it's been a huge success. The Times, a huge amount of its revenue now comes from paid digital circulation, and its overall circulation now, I think it's like 8.4 million, 7.6 of it digital. I mean, that's a huge audience and a lot of money. And their goal is to get to 10 million subscribers. And purchasing the Athletic seems like a good bet to help that along. I mean, it's a the Athletic is not making money now. It's spending a lot of money, but in it being integrated into the Times, it seems like a pretty intelligent bet. Uh,
Wait, would the Times subscriber numbers be added to because of people who subscribe to The Athletic, or will The Athletic be taken under the rubric of the New York Times, their app, their paywall, etc.? How is that all going to
I
work?
don't think a lot of those details are known yet, really. But I think it's it would certainly to the company's digital audience, however it's scored. You even if you add up the two separate ones, that's going to be a lot of new readership. And the Times has done well digitally, in addition to their regular product with specialized things like a recipe vertical. So this is I think it's a smart call and an interesting one. And it's kind of ironic because the Athletic talked about bleeding newspapers, and what do they get acquired by? A newspaper. Of course, a newspaper that's basically, is heavily a digital product now. Nonetheless, it's the old gray lady has swallowed up, the young rebel.
Well, I have to say though that through the university I get a free subscription, or a university paid, whatever the deal is they have, to the New York Times. And at the end of every year, something goes wrong, and they tell me that I don't have a subscription. I lose my mind. I really have come to depend on this. I had been in and out of having physical newspaper subscriptions. I got tired of it all piling up, making more garbage in the house. This, this is I'm addicted to it, and
Well, I'm exactly the
would pay
same
if I
way.
had to.
I spent so much of my life in print media, and I pretty much read on the phone or on the laptop all the time. Uh, you get used to the different pace, and you'll remember, Bob, in the old days, people say, "Well, nobody will read a long article uh, online," and I just find, at least in my case, that's not at all true. The Times did a terrific obituary of the movie figure Peter Bogdanovich.
Hmm.
I think it's in today's old school print product, and it's enormously long. And I read the thing online, uh, and the length sure didn't bother me. So I'm with you. I can't imagine uh, not accessing news all the time on these devices.
Of course, at the end of the week, I have the same screen time numbers as a kid who's constantly playing Fortnite, but it
Right.
all comes out
Exactly.
the same. And when it comes to the actual numbers of how much you're kind of just staring at that screen here. We don't have that much time left, but I'm hoping you can give us a little bit more of some of the things that are new in terms of the news media, because of the fact that anytime I have you on, you really have your finger on the pulse of what's going on. So, what else is new in news?
Let me mention one new venture that's been also launched this week, like as the New York Times Athletic deal, and that's two people who wouldn't be household names to most people, but are pretty big names in the world of media. Left really cushy big jobs to launch a new company, and no doubt going to be relying on venture capitalist money to finance this as yet unnamed venture. A guy named Justin Smith, who runs Bloomberg's news operation, and Ben Smith, the New York Times media columnist, formerly the head of BuzzFeed News, and the guy he's written this column for 2 years on the media, become a must read. Anybody who cares about it. They both left their job. Both of the Smiths, and with venture capitalist backing, are launching something they say is aimed at an international audience of college educated people. And they say they're competitive. They would be competing with CNN, the New York Times, the BBC. Uh, Again, it's there's not a lot of flesh on the bones yet. It's hard to know what it's going to be, and it may be all this excitement is for naught. But to me, knowing these two players involved, I think it's going to be an interesting initiative.
It is interesting that they're aiming for a demographic and calling the demographic for what it is, college educated, because to some degree, while it's a good thing, and we know that we're very narrowcast and niche media, etc., but you wonder if that contributes to the echo chamber again, because maybe the truth about certain things about Trump or whatever might get out to the already converted, but to many other people, they might seem elitist. It is interesting that they actually, would say that they're aiming at a college-educated demographic.
They're saying it over and over again too. I mean, clearly this is part of the pitch. But you're absolutely right. I saw somebody on Twitter needling Ben Smith by saying she was a college dropout, so she assumed she wouldn't be allowed to read this new product.
Well, you can't blame her for making that statement.
Not at all. Not at all.
It rang a bell with me. I can tell you that. One of the last things I wanted to mention, I jumped away from talking about the challenges facing the media in 2022. I guess it's almost impossible for local races to not have to report the local congressional race or the local Senate or gubernatorial race. Of course, the entire House is up for re-election. In terms of being a referendum on Trump versus Biden, it really almost makes it impossible to dig down to the local level when everybody is just talking about having a Republican House and how that could aid Trump in his potential return. So let's wind up by talking about some of those challenges of covering the elections of 2022.
Sure. There are a couple of points there. One, you're absolutely right. As long as I can remember in political coverage, there's been the tension between what the critics call horse race coverage, the emphasis on who's winning, who's losing, the inside baseball, at the expense of covering policy issues. What are the, what are the real issues in the campaigns? Uh, frankly, often there's more coverage of those issues than people remember. I've had people say, "Well, you never write about this," and we've written about it a number of times. They just glossed over the story, and they were more interested in kind of the sexier stuff. But there's certainly that challenge. But there's also the change that you alluded to. You remember the great Tip O'Neill, the House Speaker, used to say that all politics is local. And in fact, as you suggest, it's not true anymore. In so many races now, the emphasis is on, for Republicans is, do you love Trump enough? Or if you're in trouble. And Terry McAuliffe in Virginia, I think, probably helped us lose a campaign for governor because he spent so much time running against Trump rather than talking about what he was going to do in Virginia. But you're absolutely right. The country has been so polarized by Trump, by the top of the ticket issues, the cultural issues, that there's so much more emphasis in the campaigns themselves, as well as the coverage on things that are more national than local.
Well, Rem, it's great to start the new year of the show off with you. You really have so much knowledge, and as I said before, keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening with the news media. Which courses are you teaching at Widener this semester? Are you teaching this semester?
This semester, I'll be teaching media ethics.
Oh, okay. So you'll have plenty. You'll certainly have plenty to talk about.
Yeah.
Both in terms of what should be done and what actually is being done.
I'm not going to have a shortage of material.
That's true. Rem, as I always ask you and my other guests for the video, we're live to tape. So if you just hang on until I do the sign off, and then I'll talk to you after that. And I thank you so much for being here on this episode and all episodes that you're on of Hot Media.
Bob, I always enjoy our conversations. Thank you.
Rem Rider, one of our favorite guests on the program. I just want to remind everybody that if you Want to know more about this podcast, which is still primarily an audio podcast on all of the major platforms, Odyssey and Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and also about the YouTube video version, just go to the website. It's up on your screen if you're watching the YouTube version, www.bobmanhotmedia.com, Bobman with 2 N's. And, we also tell you an awful lot about the show on Twitter. And I would ask you to follow me on Twitter, my handle at BobManMedia, BOBMANN Media. And join us every week. We took just 1 week off, actually, for the hiatus. And, we are here every single week, as we say, to talk about the hottest content and hottest controversies in mass media. Next week, we're going to jump from news over to entertainment. I had a little disagreement on Twitter with my friend Len Klatt, a college grad friend of mine. And I said, Len has been working in Hollywood for a long time. I said I loved Being the Ricardos, the movie with Javier Bardem and Nicole Kidman. And actually, my friend Len, who knows some of the people who were principals in I Love Lucy, said, "What are you talking about? We need to talk." So I said, let's make a podcast out of it. So that's what's next week. We talk about very interesting aspects. It's all media, though. And we hope that you join us for all of it right here on Hot Media.